All right, here are solutions per problem 2 for Math 111. We're given this equation and asked to solve it 3 different ways. By factoring, and then by completing the square, and then by using the quadratic equation. Because it's the same equation, we should get the same answer each time. If you're going to solve an equation by factoring, it only helps to have the equation, it only helps to factor if the equation is set equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is subtract 6 from both sides of the equation and get to this step. And now we got to factor the left-hand side of this equation. A couple different ways you can do it. There's kind of a guess and check method that you can jump straight to here. I'm going to use a different method. This 3-step process, the first step is to find two numbers that add to 5 in this case, whatever the coefficient is on your x term, and multiply to a times c, the coefficient on your x squared term times the constant term. 4 times -6 is -24. So what you got to do is find two numbers that satisfy these criteria. Multiply 24. Let's see, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. That might work, huh? If we made the 8 positive and the 3 negative. 8 times -3 is -24. 8 plus -3 is 5. So once you have those, your second step is to replace your x term, 5x in this case, kind of with what you found above. In other words, the new coefficients on your x terms will be these two numbers, 8 and -3. So what I'm saying is our new equation is 4x squared plus 8x minus 3x minus 6 equals 0. We haven't factored. We, however, do have something that's easier to factor. Because we have 4 terms, we will factor by grouping as our third step. So the way you factor by grouping is you kind of think about these first 2 terms as a group. And their greatest common factor in this case is 4x. The greatest common factor between 4x squared and 8x is 4x. If you pull out a 4x from 4x squared, you're left with just x. If you pull out 4x from 8x, you're left with 2. So then what you got to do is pull something out of this next group, these next 2 terms, so that you'll be left with x plus 2 in the parentheses. In order to be left with x plus 2, I'd have to factor out a -3. But if I do so, I'd be left with x plus 2. This is good news. I now have 2 terms, and each of the terms have an x plus 2 in them. So I can factor out that x plus 2. If these 2 parentheses were gone because I factored it out in front and wrote it right here, what I'd have left would be 4x minus 3. So I've now factored this trinomial. The reason I factored it is because when you have a product of 2 things in the parentheses here that is equal to 0, it tells you that either the first one equals 0 or the second one equals 0. So what I now have are 2 equations that I can solve. If I subtract 2 from both sides of the equation, I get x equals -2. If I add 3 to both sides and then divide by 4, I get x equals 3/4. So what I'm saying is there's 2 solutions to this equation, -2 and +3/4. And hopefully when I solve this using other methods, I'll get those exact same answers. Second method I'll try is completing the square. We can't complete the square. Well, in our class I tell you can't complete the square unless the leading coefficient is a 1. So the very first step that we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides of the equation by 4. So 4x squared divided by 4 is just x squared. 5x divided by 4 would be 5/4 x. And 6 divided by 4, it's 3/2. Maybe I'll write it as 6/4 for now. But you could reduce that fraction to 3/2 if you really felt like it. And the way I teach you guys to do it is you now look at this equation. Now that we have a 1 as our leading coefficient, we call the coefficient on the x term b. So at this point we call b 5/4. And if b is 5/4, b over 2, what we'll need to know, would be 5/8, right? Half of this is 5/8. And really what we need is b over 2 squared. So that's 5/8 squared, which is 25/64. So all of this, I don't know, maybe this is like in a circle. I don't know if that's really helpful. But really the point is this is all kind of just side work. All of this was just to tell me what I want to add to both sides of the equation. I add this b over 2 squared thing to both sides of my equation. So I'm going to add 25/64 to the left-hand side, and I'm going to add 25/64 to the right-hand side. And the reason I do that is because what I will now have, kind of by construction, is a perfect square on the left-hand side of the equation. What I will have is x plus b over 2 squared. B over 2, we said earlier, was 5/8. So on the left-hand side here, all this simplifies to this. On the right-hand side here, this is kind of ugly. Let's see, I'd need a common denominator. My least common denominator would be 64. To make this 64, I'd have to multiply the top and the bottom by 16. 6 times 16 is 96. So I have 96/64. Is that true? 6 times 16, I think that's true. Guess I'll find out soon enough. I now have a common denominator, so I can add the numerators together. I can say I got x plus 5/8 squared is equal to 96 plus 25 is 121 over 64. So I can now solve this equation. I only have the letter x written one time, so I can just isolate it. Guess I don't really need those parentheses. I can take the square root of both sides of the equation. Make sure you put in the plus or minus when you take the square root of both sides of the equation. And the good news here is that 121 over 64 is a perfect square. 11/8 squared is 121 over 64. You can think of the square root of 121 as 11, and the square root of 64 is 8. So I get here. So if I subtract 5/8 from both sides of the equation, I get negative 5/8 plus or minus 11/8 is my solution. Let's see, negative 5/8 plus 11/8 would be 6/8, aka 3/4. Where my negative 5/8 minus 11/8 would be negative 16/8, aka negative 2. So sure enough, I get the same two answers in this second method. Third method, quadratic equation. Quadratic equation, I guess just a good one to have memorized. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. If you want to apply the quadratic equation, it solves the equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the first thing I have to do is look at this equation and put it into this form. That's what I have here. 4x squared plus 5x minus 6 equals 0. So what I'm going to call a in this problem is 4. What I'm calling b in this problem is 5. And c in this one is negative 6. So what I want to do is I want to go back up here and plug in. Negative b is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 6, all divided by 2 times a, which is 4. All right, so if I simplify a little bit, 5 squared is 25. So I want 25 minus 4 times 4 is 16, times negative 6 is negative 96. So 25 minus negative 96, in other words 25 plus 96, all divided by 2 times 4 is 8. That might look familiar, maybe. It's kind of what we were doing over here. The 25 plus the 96 is going to be the 128. Anyways, I'll just keep working. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 196 is 121. We got 8 as our denominator. Negative 5 plus or minus 11 over 8. Looks a whole lot like what we got right here. Negative 5 plus 11 is 6. I'm just going to write it. 3, 4. No, I'm going to write it all out. So that tells me x equals negative 5 plus 11 over 8, which is 6 over 8, which is 3 over 4. Or negative 5 minus 11 over 8, which is negative 16 over 8, which is negative 2. So any of these three methods, I get the exact same answer, which is good. Doubt I screwed up 3 times, so I'll assume I did it right 3 times and call this good.